Teacher talking sports, what it does, what it do, how we live in it. In this video here, I'm going to do something that we call the all mostly went undrafted fantasy football team. So in these, I'm going to take a look at players who mostly went undrafted in fantasy football leagues, but still played a vital role for many teams. I wanted to do one quarterback, two running backs, two wide receivers, and one tight end. But two quarterbacks were so close together, I couldn't choose one. So I went with two. So how I figured this out was a 12-person, 15-round league. It consists of 180 players being drafted. I took the website fantasypros.com, which looks at average draft positions from websites such as ESPN, Yahoo, prior to the season beginning. And if the player was after the first 180 guys listed, they were eligible to be included. Not an easy task, but if you are in the finals of your fantasy league and won, congratulations. Maybe one of these guys helped you, or at the end you could leave in the comments some guys you picked up off waivers that helped. Let's get started with quarterback Daniel Jones, Danny Dimes, Vanilla Vic, whatever you want to call him. What a season it has been for Jones, leading the Giants to the playoffs first time since 2016. He has 3,205 passing yards, 15 touchdowns, just 5 interceptions, while adding 708 yards on the ground with 7 touchdowns. If you had him in the fantasy championship, all he did was throw for 177 yards and 2 touchdowns yesterday, along with 91 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns. Altogether, he had 5 games with at least 68 rushing yards, 2 games with 2 rushing touchdowns, 4 games with multiple passing touchdowns. Daniel Jones, a well-scrutinized quarterback heading into the season, performed admirably and has led the Giants to the playoffs. Arguably the comeback player of the year right here, Geno Smith. This season, he leads the league in completion percentage, although that's not a fantasy stat, but thrown for 4,069 yards and 29 touchdowns with just 9 interceptions. Also rushing for 315 yards and a score. Altogether, Smith had 4 games in which he totaled at least 300 yards passing and has a total of 12 games with at least 2 touchdown passes, 3 with at least 3. So almost every week saw him as a fantasy relevant quarterback. Geno Smith still has the Seahawks with a chance to reach the postseason. Next, let's go with a guy who's been extremely hot. He's a running back, but his receiving is really what got him on here. That's Jerick McKinnon. McKinnon only has 285 rushing yards and 1 touchdown, but added 54 catches for 512 yards and 8 touchdowns. Where he really made his mark was later in the season, especially at the end. If you look at his last 4 games, he has 85 rushing yards and a touchdown, along with 23 receptions for 265 yards and 6 receiving touchdowns. He also had 6 catches in Week 9 and Week 10. Jerick McKinnon outscoring many people's top wide receiver in fantasy over those last 4 games. And let's go with a longtime veteran running back, the 32-year-old, turning 33 on January 18th, Latavius Murray. Murray actually started the season with the Saints, only played in 1 game for them in Week 4, but had 57 yards and a touchdown in that game. He has played just 12 games total, but the last 11 with the Broncos. In the 12 games, 657 rushing yards, 5 rushing touchdowns, while adding 26 catches for 117 yards. In Week 15, Murray went over the 100-yard rushing mark with 130 yards and a touchdown, also at 92 yards rushing. In Week 12, 5 of his 12 games, he had a rushing touchdown, had a total of 5 games with at least 3 receptions. Latavius Murray, who's been very fantasy relevant in seasons past, returned to fantasy relevance this season. Wide receivers, let's start with Zay Jones of the Jacksonville Jaguars. Jones played in all Actually missed one game, I'm sorry, this season. But in 15 games, 78 catches for 802 yards and 5 touchdowns. Um, had 2 games in which he totaled over 100 yards, had 2 games in which he caught double-digit passes. In Week 15, he against Dallas, he had 6 catches for 109 yards and 3 scores. In every game but 2, he had at least 3 catches. Zay Jones, Trevor Lawrence definitely had a much better sophomore season, and Zay Jones helped them immensely with that. Next, let's go with almost a Deebo Samuel light because he did a lot of work on the ground as well. That is Curtis Samuel. Samuel in 16 games, 63 catches for 658 yards and 4 touchdowns. Also, 191 rushing yards and a score. Samuel, admittedly, did not have a good Week 17 if you start him in the championship game. 1 catch for 6 yards. But started off the season great with 22 catches and 2 touchdowns in his first 3 games. He had a total of 7 games with at least 5 catches on the season. Also had 4 games with over 20 yards rushing. Curtis Samuel was a viable starter at wide receiver in fantasy for many weeks. And at tight end, and this was tight, really between 2 guys, I went with Evan Engram. Engram in his 16 games, 69 catches, 739 yards, and 4 touchdowns. If you look at weeks 14 through 16, that 3-game span, Engram caught 26 passes for 337 yards and 2 touchdowns. He had a total of 10 games with at least 4 catches, a tight end position where there aren't many viable starters each week. Evan Engram provided that spark for many teams' fantasy. During the course of the season, he is my tight end. So there you have it. The all mostly one undrafted fantasy football team. Quarterback, Daniel Jones, Geno Smith, too hard to pick just one. Running backs, Jerick McKinnon and Latavius Murray. Wide receivers, Zay Jones, Curtis Samuel. Tight end, Evan Engram. Some honorable mentions include Jared Goff at quarterback, Isaiah Pacheco, and Samaje Perine at running back. Donovan Peoples-Jones, Joshua Palmer, and Darius Slayton at wide receiver. And Taysom Hill, who I really widely considered over Evan Engram, but he did have some absolutely quiet games during the season. And another Saint, Juwan Johnson, who scored a lot of touchdowns. But again, I will admit wide receivers are not as strong as last year when I did this. Last year, my wide receivers was really between 3 guys, Hunter Renfrow, Christian Kirk, and Ramon St. Brown. So they're not as strong this year, but, Samuel and Zay Jones definitely were flex-worthy many weeks. But let me know in the comments if there's anyone I didn't mention that you think should be included. Who did you pick up off the waiver wire that helped guide you to maybe not a fantasy championship, but provided much value for you during the course of the season? Maybe tomorrow I will take a look at the most disappointing fantasy players of the season at each position. So stay tuned for that. Don't forget to subscribe. Tell a friend to tell a friend to tell a friend to subscribe. Like the video, share the video, hit the bell for notifications. I'm out.